Brian, let's talk about intervention.
Okay.
So, for those that might not know, what is an intervention?
Well, I think one of the things about intervention is that there are many types of interventions. Um, the, Anything that intervenes on somebody, right,
Hmm.
comes in between them, is considered an intervention. So, I've worked with people and we've talked about some things, and they've gone home and they've been able to intervene on people simply by letting people know this is a problem and here's why it's a problem. And then there's interventions where maybe they'll be able to talk about, concerns about what's going on. Can we get you to go see somebody? Can we get some professional help with this? Um, I would think that the most important thing is that people who are concerned get some professional help to identify what really is necessary. Now, interventions, as I said, can start pretty simple and be successful with very little work. There's also the interventions where it's a full-fledged, we're going to sit down, we're going to have a meeting, and the goal really is getting someone out of where they currently are into residential treatment for whatever the situation is. So interventions can be done I've done interventions on people for gambling, for drugs and alcohol, for alcohol only, mental health issues. Sometimes, especially around depression, people can be depressed and feeling suicidal and not think that they need to do anything about it. So um, interventions can be done for all types of problems. How much we're going to do and to what degree needs to be done really needs to be assessed. And so, there's over the years, there's been people who only do one type of intervention one way.
Hmm.
There are different models of intervention. So, they can be, an intervention can be just that, again, we're going to sit down with family and friends and get that person to, go to a treatment or get help at whatever level. That's needs to be determined in pre-intervention work. So it becomes important for everyone to be on the same page. I would say that is probably the most critical thing and the biggest part of the work that I do pre-intervention work with families and friends is getting them all on the same page and to kind of understand what the goal is. And the
Yeah.
primary goal of an intervention is to get somebody to take a look at what's going on and decide what might be necessary to change that or address that situation.
Okay.
So sometimes I think the other thing that becomes really important is that I've often said we need to have what I call a pre-intervention meeting. So you get everybody together and
Hmm.
talk about what's going on, and a lot of information comes out because more often than not, the family members and friends all know different things.
Right.
So when you put them all together, one person will say, "Well, I didn't know that," and then another person go, "Well, I didn't know that." So a lot of information comes out, and so when you have the pre-intervention meeting, and I've had some where I've said, "Listen, this is really not a serious problem. Here's what you can think about doing." More often than not, when people start asking questions about how to get help to help someone,
Hmm.
the situation is usually pretty bad. And so, more often than not, by the end of an intervention meeting, it becomes pretty clear that we need to go to a next step
Yeah.
and then deciding what that next step is. Because, again, it can be a simple, um, let's talk about the problem. And if people feel they can do that, that can be the first step to having things change. Now, again, I've seen times where people feel they can just sit down and talk to somebody, and they do, and they find out that the situation is much worse than what they thought. And when I say that, I mean that someone's more resistant to help, or more resistant to giving up the behavior or drug or chemical that they're doing. At that point, then the next step, we might have to escalate what that intervention work would do.
Mm-hmm.
I would say one of the biggest struggles for people with intervention is when it doesn't go as planned or the way we'd like it to, they kind of get frustrated and give up. And generally speaking, when people come to me and talk about interventions, they're pretty much at the end of the rope. They've generally tried things. So it becomes very difficult for them to keep going or keep hoping for change, because they've struggled through a lot of different ways of hoping that change would happen. So the most important thing with intervention is you need to think of it rather than a one action. It can be a series of actions that are going to bring about, the desired impact or desired effect of getting a person to seek some help.
Yeah. So if I was a family member looking, maybe I have a loved one that's struggling with addiction of any capacity, when should I start thinking about or looking more into the intervention process?
Well, as soon as you know there's a problem, as soon as you're concerned about what's going on, that's the time to start looking at the intervention process. So again, that could be as simple as sitting down and having some conversation. I think the other thing that people need to understand is that they have, many times when people come to me, they've tried all kinds of things. But generally speaking, what's going to get in the way of family members, especially family members or really close friends, is that emotional connection. So it's kind of like you go into the situation and you don't want to get somebody to get upset with you. You're afraid of people getting upset with you because you're going to confront a problem. We're used to mind your own business, so that becomes one of those hindrances of just having the conversation.
Yeah.
So sometimes the conversations have never been had. Sometimes, I'd say another problem with family members is they're either too much on the enabling process. And what I mean by that is they'll sit down and talk about it, and then they'll try to come up with all these different answers on why somebody has a problem,
Like
or
justifying
it, and then saying, well, okay, now just don't drink as much, or very often, family members are the first ones to go, well, he's struggling with his wife, or his mom and dad have been tough on him, all those different things. And they certainly have something to do with the situation, but not necessarily when we talk about addiction to drugs or alcohol. Those things have nothing to do with the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
Again, one of the things that I have to do a lot is convince people to understand that addiction is a disease process.
Mm-hmm.
What becomes important about that is that also understanding it as a disease process also means that it will get worse without treatment.
Right.
So sometimes people they're willing to wait till things get more difficult. The problem with waiting is that the longer someone's addicted and the further that disease progresses, the more there's a level of denial that's going to keep that person from accepting help a lot of times. So then you have the thing where I've heard this so many times is that, there's nothing you can do until they want help. There's nothing you can do until they hit bottom. I consider those two things somewhat irrational. If someone has a brain disease, such as chemical dependency or depression, it's like when people tell people who are depressed to just get out there and do something. Well, if they could have, they would have. True depression, clinical depression is an imbalance in the brain. So brain chemistry. And it becomes important to understand that sometimes the only thing that's going to help somebody is to treat that. And sometimes that's physically, sometimes that's with cognitive behavioral therapy or other therapies. And today there's a lot of ways to treat addiction, but a lot of people, when it comes to mental health, there's as much stigma with mental health as there is with addiction in many ways. Because we're all supposed to be okay. We're all supposed to know what we need to do. So a lot of times that's the first thing we've got to look at for family members and the person who's struggling with the addictive behavior or the mental health issues. So having the family understand the disease process becomes important because, again, expecting somebody to make a good rational decision whose brain is not operating properly.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes a problem. That's where people struggle with bringing a professional in. Well, that person's going to feel betrayed. We're giving up family secrets. Mind your own business again, right? But that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that if a person's brain chemistry is off, and you're trying to get them to make a rational decision, then you actually become a part of the problem. So the intervention process is to try to get someone, and again, there's different ways that people operate. I would say in the old days, and what you've seen on TV is kind of like, somebody rolls in, does an intervention and kind of hammers the person and they acquiesce and go to treatment. There is a level of that sometimes. And sometimes it has to be because the person can't make a good decision to go. So now you're going to do everything you can to set it up for them to go. Many times during an intervention, I've looked at a person and said, look, your family's supportive of you getting help. We've set it all up. There's nothing you have to do other than go. Right?
Yeah.
And you would think, again, for a logical person, okay. Sometimes what happens is somebody who's going to go to treatment during an intervention will say, well, I don't need to go, but I'll go if that makes you happy. I always tell people, I don't care what they say, just so they go. Because what'll happen is and one of the key things that will destroy an intervention, a full sit-down intervention process, is arguing with the person in any way. And when I say argue, people see that only as, blah, 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 going back and forth. Arguing is when you engage in any kind of discussion about whether they should or shouldn't. I've often said arguing with an addicted person is a losing proposition, always. The only thing you can really do with a person is tell them the truth and stand with that. Because once you start to argue, you lose ground.
Yeah.
So, someone says, well, I'll go, but I don't need to go. I'll only go because you want me to. The first thing somebody's going to want to say, no, you got to go for yourself. No, you got to go.
Yeah.
You just got to go. Once you get there, then we'll deal with, your own internal motivation. But sometimes nothing can change until we get the person in treatment so that we can get the chemicals out of their system, or if it's behavioral, get them away from the behaviors, get them away from their regular routine. Sometimes it's important to get people out of their living environment. Sometimes not. But often getting someone away, depending on how severe the addiction is. And that's another thing that people don't talk about a lot of times is the severity of addiction. There is different levels of severity of addiction. It's not one size fits all. So if someone has a severe addiction, and again, that's part of that assessment process that needs to be happening. If it's a severe addiction, then we got to look at, a treatment program that's going to deal with that. And sometimes that's getting them out of their environment into a safe place. And at that point, what you'll see a lot of times is within 30 days of general rehab treatment, a person's attitude can change because the drugs are out of their system. Their thinking is cleared up a bit, and now you can have a conversation with them about what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen interventions and people volunteering to go into treatment and leaving no better than when they got there. There's no guarantee on that. I will say that another important aspect to somebody being successful with interventions and treatment is getting family involved and family all on the same page.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you about that, because now that this is for every family, but I think you would also agree that a large percentage of addicts come from some sort of family dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
So to get a whole family together when dysfunction is probably prevalent to get on the same page for something like this, I can only imagine can bring a lot of potential issues or problems or extra things may arise. So how does somebody like you in the professional sense, how are you able to help families get on that same page?
Well, see, to me, that's the hallmark of a good intervention process is that I've spent hours. So again, like the TV show, right? You just see them come in, do the intervention. I've spent hours with family members working them through some of that process. It's been a while, but my first intervention, sit-down intervention, was in New York. I went up there and I went up the night before to talk with the family and meet with them. And it was a young lady and her sister. Mom and dad were pretty good, but the sister was angry and so upset. And I pretty much spent 3 hours with that family. And by the end of that time, the sister was crying and talking about how afraid she was of her sister dying. Mm-hmm. So the anger that she was showing wasn't the real feeling there. I mean, it was in response to, failed attempts to get this person to look at their addiction. We drove back from New York. We drove back to Pennsylvania to get the person to treatment. And I saw healing begin right then and there. That was one of the things, because I wasn't quite sure when I first started looking at intervention whether I believe some of the myths, can't help somebody unless they want help. And, they got to hit the bottom. What I saw was getting the family to do things differently allowed the process to happen. So in other words, the sister talked to her about her fear rather than yelling and being angry with her. Mom and dad was a little more, dad was actually the easier one, the softer one. But his job was to become a little bit more strict with this, letting his daughter know that she needed to go get help. And then mom needed to just sort of get into the middle ground. And what happens a lot of times in a dysfunctional family where addiction's involved, especially when parents are involved. One parent will sort of be the disciplinarian or the hard line.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one tends to be softer. We gotta do more for them. We gotta help them. And they may start out only this far away, but as one continues that, the other one, and then the other one, the next thing you know, they're further apart
Yeah.
at the opposite ends. My goal usually is to get them to come together again. And so the one who's making the excuses, let's stop making excuses.
Mm-hmm.
The one who's saying, well, they got to just, no, we got a disease process. We got to work on this.
Yeah.
So getting the families together and being on the same page can be a lot of work. And sometimes I tell family members they're not ready for the intervention
Mm.
because they're so in different arenas, right? In other words, I'm over here and thinking it's this, and we got to do this. And as long as that split is there, that is music to an addict's ears, right? As long as I can keep everybody split. So again, the idea of an intervention is bringing everybody together. Now we talk about family a lot, but friends are a very big part of that as well. So people always say, who should be in the intervention process? Who has clout with this person? Who does this person care about what they think? Who does this person look up to, right? And those are the people that can make a difference in what they say. And again, presenting a united front. Sometimes if someone cannot be different, might be better for them to not be involved in the process. So I've had fathers who are just so angry, and fathers are very difficult sometimes. Well, both mom and dads can be difficult two different ways. Dad, because they should do it my way. Mom, because we got to coddle them. I remember, I've had mothers many times say, well, you're not a mother. And I go, no, I'm not, right? That somehow it's more difficult for them to hold their ground.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not used to holding your ground, it's difficult. If you're used to, hammering on the table, demanding things be done, it's difficult to back off. So again, a lot of times it's not so much which is the right way to do it. It's changing because we're used to it. If someone's constantly arguing with me, I'm ready to go. If I know I can manipulate somebody, then that's the route I'm going to go. So during the intervention process, a lot of times, I consider my job keeping everybody in that middle ground. And again, we're looking at this being a disease, and our only goal for that day, if we're doing a sit-down intervention, and even whether they're going away or saying that they'll get some treatment outpatient, if that's what we've come up with, we got to stand. Once we say something, we got to stand our ground. Another piece that I tell people is never make idle threats. Right? If you're going to put a boundary up, then you've got to stick with that boundary. But there's no place for the threats. And again, I think that's some of the stigma from the old days where people would be threatening this, that. I don't believe in the idea of you threaten somebody and have leverage and beat them over the head. There are consequences if you're not, in other words, if you're not going to stop using, well, then we're not going to support that. That's not really a threat. That's just letting somebody know if this is where you're going to be, I can't help you do that. And more times than not, I tell anybody, we'll support you 100%. Okay? We don't need the 50-50. We don't need to meet 50-50. I'll go 100% to get you to a place where maybe you can make some good decisions. But if you're going to be out there using, then I can't support that. I also know that a lot of times people go, well, we're going to cut them off and never talk to them again. I've never been a part of that kind of intervention. I don't think it's, I just don't, I don't think it's effective in any way. Now, again, I will not participate in your active addiction, right? I've worked with, I know talking to one of the managers of a rock star, you know, I said to him, I said, you're sending them here to treatment, but you're the one buying the heroin at times. You can't do that. And the manager said, you understand that millions of dollars are at stake if he doesn't get up and perform. And this particular person, if he was drunk, he couldn't sing. If he was high, he could. So they would let him get high,
Yeah.
you know. So in that particular case, again, people of means or, you know, TV stars and CEOs of major corporations, they're enabled tremendously because a person's financial gain is at stake, right?
Right.
Or if my boss is the one that they want me to try to intervene on, that's pretty bad, right? Especially if it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
So those are some of the difficulties that you run into. Again, people have to have a united front because the addict or the person who's involved on the other side of the intervention, if it doesn't go well, the first thing they're going to do is, you know, they may refuse. They may just flat out refuse. And during an intervention process, a lot of times I have to kind of accent that because while they're refusing, families trying to talk them into going or changing their mind.
Yeah.
And I've got to let families know once you get to a certain point, you're going to argue for no reason, you know?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll just look at the person that we're intervening on and say, so your answer is no. And they'll say yes. You know, my answer is no. Then that's when we start looking at what kind of consequences are going to be. And when I say consequences, in other words, yeah, I can't support you continuing to use. I can't support you. Sometimes I can't continue. You can't stay working here without getting help. Okay. And again, that's not a threat. It's really, this would be a consequence, but we're taking this last chance to save your job.
Right.
So it's important sometimes for people to understand that. Not letting somebody have consequences, enabling them not to have consequences, very seldom is ever going to work out well.
And one of the things you were touching on too was how for family members, if they're watching the addict or the person that and is just refusing, kind of seems like something that would be very important to be talking about beforehand is that potential expectation. So is that something that you would be bringing up in a pre-intervention meeting where you're talking with the family, like, ideally this is where we want it to go, but, we also have to be ready for the case of that isn't the outcome, and here's how we go from there. Is that part of the conversation?
Well, yes, and it's very important to understand it as a process versus an event.
Okay.
Because I've actually, sometimes the pre-intervention work with the family is enough to have some good things happen. I had a recent intervention, pre-intervention meeting, two pre-intervention meetings. And after that, they sat down and talked to the person, and the person said they would go and do some outpatient help and stuff like that. Now, if that fails, there certainly can come back and we can start looking at what is the next step. I think it's so important for assessment because if the person is not that far along in addiction or the addiction is not that severe, we can look at some other options. Once it gets to a certain severity, though, then a full sit-down intervention is probably going to be necessary to get that person where they need to be. But again, not always. So if you consider it a process, sometimes that process can be a couple meetings, and then they're ready to do it on their own. Sometimes in this process, they realize that they need to really bring somebody else in. A lot of times, I am getting people, because they have a level of frustration, and I talk about what needs to happen, and they go, well, we've done that before. Well, not really. What I'm saying is we're going to have a united front, a specific thing that we're asking somebody to do. Whereas before, like they'll say, well, we've talked about this. Well, yeah, and then I've gotten angry and it blows it up. One of the most difficult interventions I had was 3 sisters and a husband. And the woman was in the middle-aged people. The woman was addicted to Xanax. And so I always tell everybody during a pre-intervention meeting, don't engage in an argument. Don't let that person engage you in an argument. And again, if the person, the focus of the intervention starts saying, well, you this or you that, sometimes like it was, these were sisters. And so sometimes what will happen is that person will then say, well, but you this or you that. And my thing is we're not here to talk about that right now. We're here to talk about you. Well, we started the intervention process, and before you know it, this female addict hit every single one of them, including the husband, and they were all arguing. And loudly arguing. And I actually had to extricate myself from that room. I said, nobody would stop. I couldn't. And they went out. Everybody went out of control. Needless to say, it wasn't successful that day, and it also made it so that, or it also became that the family just said, "That's it, we're done." And that's the worst thing that happens, especially if the intervention isn't positive that day. I've had many interventions that weren't positive the day of the intervention, but its family members stayed firm with it. A week later, or maybe 2 weeks or something like that, in a short period of time, that person, I've had many people call me then and go, what do I need to do? I had, many years ago, I had a young female. Our brothers and sisters got together. It was a crew of them. We set up for the intervention. She didn't show up, so we went to her house. Right? We knocked on the door. And she was screaming and carrying on, "Get away from me!" And she actually left her place and ran away. Right? And on her way, she said, "You people are all crazy, blah blah blah." And afterwards, again, sometimes in that kind of situation, we spend time then talking afterwards. What do we need to do? How do we follow up? And the family did. And a week later, she called and said, all right, what do I got to do? But too often what happens generally with addicts is, we'll kind of get to this place where we demand that they do something. It doesn't happen, and then we get frustrated and we just give up, or they do it for a day or two and then don't follow through. So when you do the same thing with the intervention process, then that's where I'm going to consider that we're not successful. But even if we don't succeed at that moment, an intervention has some level of success in the fact that the family came together, hopefully the family sees something different, and hopefully they will work with each other more.
Yeah.
And as long as that happens, then I say things are successful. Whether or not somebody gets the treatment on the day of an intervention is not the only way to look at how successful were we.
Okay. Now we've talked a lot about the pre the pre stages of intervention. Talked a little bit about some of the expectations and what to expect going into it. I can imagine being in this type of work for a handful of decades now. Uh, the way, as a professional, you've had to approach interventions has had to shift a little bit. What are some of the differences you've seen with how interventions maybe were conducted in, the even the early 2000s compared to how they are now?
Okay, so we can go
We can go further back.
further back, yes.
I'm trying to show my respect.
Yes. What I would say, here's a couple different things. My personal experience has been that in my younger days, addiction, and especially chemical dependency, there was a lot of the work was really getting people to look at it a little differently. And there was an acceptance that the person needed to change, and there was some level of, we still had all the reasons not to do it, but once a family was convinced that we needed to do something, there wasn't a lot of. Right now, right now there's probably, I don't know, I'm just picking an arbitrary number, but it's probably close to it, at least 50 ways that people think you can deal with addiction, right? And you got different programs, and today there's more about trauma, more about mental health. Everybody's got an anxiety disorder. If you're an alcoholic, you got an anxiety disorder. It goes along with it. Now, again, I'm not saying people don't have a separate anxiety disorder, but everything gets so convoluted, and you got so many people with different opinions, that makes it much more difficult. Well, you don't need to go to inpatient treatment. Well, you can do this now, and then now we have PHP, which is a partial hospitalization, right? And so we have all these different ways, and that makes it more complicated. And what I'm getting at is that as much as we can talk about, like, growing up, my dad was tough on me. Well, okay, and sometimes somebody's too tough, right? There's a line where it is abusive, but there's also a line where you were disciplined, and we need discipline. Then there's also the line where we don't discipline at all, and that doesn't work, right? So it's the same thing. I got 50 different options. I got 50 people telling me to do 50 different things. Why should I listen to this guy, or why should I do it this way? And again, when you talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, anybody that program works for, they think it's the best thing in town. So assessment becomes very important, and identifying how severe the addiction is, how severe the disease is. And that should talk about what treatment is versus, well, let me try it this way, let me try it that way. If you go to a doctor, diabetes is one of those that I use a lot. So there's different ways to treat diabetes. But when you go to the doctor's going to tell you what is the best way to treat it. So when you got everybody just working off of opinions, and I think a lot of times, again, so if we look at AA, people don't say my opinion is AA is great. They say AA is the only way, right? And so that's what you end up having happening. Sort of like with the government, instead of we have two different Republicans and Democrats, and here's how these guys see it and these guys see it. Instead, one has to be right and one has to be wrong, and that's where we get in trouble today, on many different levels. So that makes it much more difficult. And some of the laws that exist, and they're good to protect people, but they also enable people. So it makes it a little more difficult to do some of the intervention work. Also, I would say many years ago, there were very few, quote, interventionists. Now, everyone's an interventionist, and you have people who have always done 12-step program doing 12 steps. But next thing you know, and AA's forever non-professional, but some people feel like, I've had people who tell me that they don't need interventions because they have somebody who's in recovery and they're going to help them get the person into treatment. And I don't spend too much time arguing with them. I just tell them that they have my number, and sometimes, many times, I get the call later. The only problem I have is now it's a little more difficult because it's sort of like doing the job halfway. And now we got to finish it, which makes it a little more difficult. So I had a guy one time, I have to chuckle because he actually answered the door. The guy that we were going to intervene on, and he answered the door, and he goes, "You're Brian?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're here to intervene on me."
Not right to the chase on that one, right?
Yeah. And I was, I was a little shocked, and I'm like, yeah. Because I didn't want to say no, right? I mean,
Right.
Yeah. And, well, come on in. And we sat down and we're going on. So he was familiar with all this. And he actually was checking me out to see how well I was doing. And so finally I looked at him and I said, "Are you going to go or what?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm just seeing how well you are at your job." Because he had an intervention or two done on him before.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the stories of the whole intervention process can be sad or funny, different situations. But yeah.
That's a point. Yeah. I think really the last thing to cover on intervention would be some people might feel like I would say like family members, for instance, they might be coming into it, and because we've talked about, trying to keep the family secrets, trying to, not wanting to quote unquote betray the loved one. And I'm sure there's many other fears. For someone that might be feeling those things in trying to get help for their loved one, what are some ways that you've been able to work through that with family members, or what are some things that they can be thinking of?
Well, one of the first things I let family members know is that, at least from my perspective, doing an intervention is one of the most loving things you can do for somebody. Now, again, that also means we're not going to be ugly and beat people up and, emotionally beat them up and demand all these different things. So if someone if someone was having a heart attack, um, and it's interesting because people think the only thing that like an alcoholic is the only one who denies having alcoholism. I can tell you that my father had 4 heart attacks and denied having heart attacks. So if someone's having a heart attack, and they're saying, no, it's not really a heart attack. Again, if I care about that person, I'm going to say, no, let's get you to the hospital. No. And again, under those circumstances, and in most cases, the person there are people who would say, no, I don't need to go, or I can't afford it, or there'd be all these different reasons not to go. Let me see if I can get through this myself. All those, it's the same dynamic going on. So I really do try to get people to understand that you are trying to help someone who's not really capable of helping themselves right now. Mm-hmm. And if you love someone, right, you would want to do that under all circumstances. So the biggest thing here is moving away from an alcoholic drinks only because they want to, or an alcoholic became an alcoholic because of the way they drink. I drink the way I drink because I'm an alcoholic. And that's an important distinction. So it's not like, some people cannot become alcoholic. Mm-hmm. I know people that, and this is how a quote normal person would be. They have a couple drinks, and they're like, I'm good. I, as an alcoholic, have a couple drinks and go, when are we going to start drinking? Maybe in the beginning, at some level, I was like, I drank too much. But almost always I drank too much, not because I wanted to, but because that's what alcoholism is. Yeah. So when people can begin to understand that, and then also have to be able to understand that when you put toxic chemicals into your body, and alcohol is a toxic chemical, you're going to do damage to the brain. I mean, drinking alcohol kills brain cells. Unfortunately, we have plenty, so we can afford to kill some of them. But I mean, you just need to understand that that's the process, and so at some level, depending on the level of severity of the addiction and how long it's been, if someone's liver is impacted by alcoholism and they have hepatitis, that's toxic chemicals that are not getting taken out of the body. Well, they're also going through the brain. Marijuana today, I mean, oh my God, it makes me crazy. People are becoming psychotic because there is so much THC in it, right? This ain't the stuff we used to smoke years ago. It's potent, and people become psychotic. They do not think clearly. THC lodges in the fat of your brain. So it's like putting sugar in a gas tank, right? The car's not going to go. Mm. And if you watch somebody who smokes enough pot or does enough gummies or whatever, they're not very motivated. That's part of what comes with it, right? And that's part of the thinking process. It's not you're lazy because you smoke pot. As a result of smoking pot, your brain doesn't have motivation. And it's a slow process. So it isn't like I've got a 40-hour-a-week job and I'm hustling every day, and now today I just aren't hustling. No. It's, I have a 40-hour-a-week job now. I'm only working 35 hours because, I decided I needed to take a look. And next thing you know, I'm not working at all. Mm. It's a slow dissension. And I've done a lot of interventions where part of the intervention is we're not going to let you live in the cellar anymore. If you're not going to get clean, because again, and that's part of it is that there's just no motivation to get out there and get a job. And when you're young, getting a job requires a little energy. Well, if you're smoking pot, you ain't got it. You don't have the energy. And if anybody's watching this and they hear that and they smoke pot, don't say I'm full of,
Oh yeah.
but it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And today, more, especially younger people, have ended up in the ER because of psychotic thinking, psychotic behaviors. So, and they're not capable of seeing what it's doing to them because it's affecting their brain where they make those decisions. Alcoholics, after a certain point, have the same situation. It's toxic. And that's the way it is for chemicals. Behavioral, some of the behavioral addictions, same thing. Another interesting intervention I've done was I got a call from professional gamblers. And I also do some counseling for gambling. So I thought that was quite interesting. But the intervention was not for gambling. It was like a partnership with three guys, and they considered themselves professional gamblers. And the other guy was in trouble because he couldn't gamble well because he was using cocaine. So they wanted to get him off the cocaine. So that was an interesting one for me because I guess there are professional gamblers. I mean, there's people who gamble for a living. There's also a lot of people who have a problem with gambling and
Right.
need to stop. So, but in this particular case, that was one of them. And so, his gambling partner said he needed to get off the cocaine. And he pretty much told us all where we could go.
I believe that.
Yeah, cocaine's a rough one too. Well, they're all rough.
Yeah.
Different reasons, but different ways.
Anything on the intervention we didn't cover yet? Or anything else that would be beneficial for?
I can't think of anything really. No. I think one, and this could be a story to put in somewhere, but again, another intervention was a youngin', and he had three brothers. All three brothers were in law enforcement. One was state, one was federal, and one was local. And I had a pre-intervention meeting, and two of them were too busy to show up, right? So I had a little concern. The day of the intervention, they showed up, and it was one of the most difficult interventions. And I intervened mostly by looking at the kid, going, "Pack your bag, I'll get you out of here." Because, and during the whole thing, the brothers were just, kind of yelling at him and telling him he better get his shit together or they'll arrest him and blah blah. And I remember on the way to the rehab, he was like, "Oh God, thank you." And he actually did pretty well.
Nice.
I don't know how he did long term, but he did well in treatment and stayed sober for a while. But yeah, there's a lot of different things regarding intervention work.
I believe that.
Yeah. So, yep.